The world is on edge this hour, watching and wondering as a huge moment is playing out in Russia. The Wagner Group has allegedly called a halt to its march to Moscow. The army of mercenaries was reported to be 200 kilometers from the Russian capital when its leader, Yevgeny Prigozhin, said he'd ordered his troops back to their field camps in Ukraine to avoid spilling Russian blood.
Дорогу, видимо, пытались перекрыть на Москву.
These are pictures of a smashed roadblock on the main highway north to the capital. The barrier of trucks broke through by this Wagner column of military equipment whose advance had been unchecked. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has reacted to the developments in Russia. Zelensky took to social media today saying that, quote, Russia's weakness is obvious. The president also says the longer Moscow keeps its troops and mercenaries in Ukraine, the more pain and problems it would create for Russia. Zelensky says Putin's use of propaganda is faltering and that, quote, there is now so much chaos that no lie can hide it. For more on this, we've reached Aurel Brown. He's a professor of international relations and political science at the University of Toronto. He's also an associate at the Davis Center at Harvard University. Aurel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
So I want to start with some of these unconfirmed reports that we have that the Belarusian president, Alexander Lukashenko, said to have negotiated an agreement to stop the march of these Wagner soldiers towards Moscow. What do you make of that?
It seems that this rebellion, which in many ways was a surprise, but it shouldn't have been entirely because dictatorships often tend to disintegrate in unpredictable ways. They are looking good and strong for many, many years. Then all of a sudden we see weaknesses that we should have noticed before. But now we also have this kind of irony where Lukashenko, who is this extremely repressive, thuggish leader of Belarus, who has increasingly become controlled by Vladimir Putin, now supposedly negotiated an agreement with Yevgeny Prigozhin, who has been a creature created in a way by Vladimir Putin.
In your view here, Aurel, why do you think Belarus's president, why would he be negotiating with Wagner? Why would that not be Vladimir Putin?
Well, Vladimir Putin, we have to understand this not in terms of the standard analysis of looking at Clausewitz, looking at Machiavelli, looking at standard social science theories of decision-making, but probably we are better off trying to get our clues from The Sopranos or from The Godfather, looking at the Putin regime as an organized crime syndicate. And there, the head of that syndicate must look strong and must look invincible. So it would be unbecoming for Vladimir Putin, who has said that this is a betrayal, a stab in the back, it is treason, that he would now negotiate. He needs to be seen to be crushing this rebellion. And if he cannot do that, then someone else has to step in and try to mediate something which could create some kind of face-saving measure. Now, we're in the early days, and ultimately, we cannot predict exactly what will happen. But if Vladimir Putin is not able to reinforce the image which he has used to deter any kind of challenge before, then this is a weakness that will be exploited one way or another by various factions within Russia that have feared him in the past.
Talk to us a little bit more, Aurel, about that potential weakness that is maybe being exposed here. How are you thinking about the current state of Putin's regime in Russia?
We are looking at a regime that has been in power for 23 years, leading a country that has the largest territory in the world, unparalleled natural resources, and yet outside of the wealthy oligarchs, it is a country that is wretchedly poor. On a per capita basis, the GDP of Russia is less than that of Turkey or Romania. And so all of these resources have been wasted. The corruption that has been so pervasive has obviously also penetrated the military and the security services, which have proven to be ineffective. The expected victory parade that Vladimir Putin was going to have in Kiev did not materialize. And now Prigozhin came out and said, this is a war, and it is an unjustified war, and the conduct of the war is inexcusable. This is a frontal challenge, but it exposes the failure and the corruption of the Russian regime.
Aurel, we've heard from Vladimir Putin saying that the West should not be using this as some sort of opportunity to harm Russia. We've seen similar statements today from the Russian Foreign Ministry. How do you think NATO and some of those allied countries, how do you think they should be responding to what we've been seeing play out?
Vladimir Putin has constantly attacked NATO, has constantly attacked what he calls the collective West as a way of diverting attention away from the fundamental failures of his regime. You know, when we look at the defeated powers in the Second World War, 30 years later, they were prosperous, successful democracies. 30 years after the fall of communism, Russia is basically an economic failure. And so he needed to divert that attention away. And it is not working any longer. NATO is not allowing Russia to dictate the terms. And we can see this, that two neutral states that have been so accommodating to Russia, Finland and Sweden, decided to join NATO because of the Russian aggression. And Finland is already a member of NATO, and Sweden is about to become a member of NATO. So consequently, the alliance needs to look at its own policies, how to support democracy, how to deter aggression. And I must say that we have not been particularly bold. At times we have been too timid, confusing caution with timidity. And caution is always wise because Russia is a nuclear power. But this is not a time for the alliance to stop supporting, in fact, from increasing support for Ukraine.
How do you think the people of Russia are thinking about this right now, ordinary Russian citizens?
Much of the news that they have been getting in a very controlled media environment was from television, which 95% plus has basically been giving the Kremlin line. But now, even though social media has been blocked in many ways, when you have the mayor of Moscow saying that people in the city should not be going to work on Monday because this is a special situation, then I think more and more Russians massive failure this war of aggression against Ukraine has been.
And just finally here, Aurel, what are you going to be watching for, not just in the days ahead, but of course this has been changing so rapidly. What are you going to be watching for in the hours ahead?
We have to see if there will be cracks in the support system for the Putinite regime. That is, will the military begin to fray? We know that the Wagner Group took over Rostov-on-the-Don, which is the regional headquarters of the military, without a fight. The military was passive. That is not the expectation that Vladimir Putin had. So we have to see how the military will react, whether the security services, the Siloviki, will continue to support all out Vladimir Putin, and whether the National Guard, which is basically designed to protect the Putin regime, will continue to do that.
Aurel, great to speak with you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on.
Aurel Brown for us. Stay with us. We have more coverage for you straight ahead.